Hello and welcome. Today I'm joined by Alex Almazan, who is the founder of Almazan Law, a firm he built from the ground up 17 years ago into a leading force in the Florida legal market. Alex is a member of DWC Council and the Defense Leaders Council, where he is prominent voice on how artificial intelligence is fundamentally reshaping the legal landscape. Today, we are diving into Alex's second act of his career, moving from the struggle of early years to aggressively scaling the firm that uses AI not just as a tool, but as a total redesign of how law is practiced. We will discuss why most firms are implementing AI incorrectly and how to capture institutional knowledge so your firm's value doesn't walk out the door when a partner retires. Alex, welcome to the Growth Switch.
Alex, thanks for having me, buddy. Look forward to the conversation.
Our pleasure to have you. Now, we spoke before the episode that at the beginning of your career, balancing being a parent and a family life with a growing firm was quite a challenge. Do you want to talk about what were you doing in the business to manage that?
So a lot of what I do when I talk to you, and thanks for having me again, Alex, and I talk to other people is I try to, so I was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I was perfect in what I wanted to be, which was to be very present for my wife and for my children. And so I definitely prioritized that and that I have zero regrets for. But as a result, it took much longer to scale the business, took much longer to grow the business, and it took much longer to learn the business. And but it was something that was immovable for me in that standpoint, and I wasn't getting it at the places that I was working at before. So that was the primary reason, frankly, for going out on my own at that time. So that was a very big part of the component when my now 18-year-old daughter was 2 years old, and my now 16-year-old daughter, my wife, was a couple of months pregnant with her. That's when we actually decided, or I decided to start the firm at that time back in May of 2009.
What were the rules that you set for yourself to make sure you always protect your family time, even if there are maybe some fires that were happening at the firm?
So what I did at the time, and I had to stress at the time, technology is a little different in 2026 than 2009. So the answers that I'm giving as to how I did things would not be the ones to follow in 2026 for that version of me today. There's a totally different playbook now that I wish I had. The frankly, it was no more than I hired to value my time very early on. So the what I did was to make sure that I hired individuals that were giving me my time, so that I overpaid to have really good people at the time when it was just me and two people, so that I could be the soccer coach at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday when my daughter was only 5 or 6 years old and they're not in class, and that I could be present at night every night when they were going to sleep. So a lot of what I did at that time was around structuring to make sure. So I had soccer practices at 2 in the afternoon on my calendar, and it was really about organizing my calendar to ensure. So if somebody needed a hearing to go to court and my assistant was looking at my calendar and there was a soccer practice in there for a bunch of 5-year-olds running around a field at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday, that hearing didn't get set that day. And that was really the big thing for me back then, was to value my time. Now, on the other end of it, when my kids would go to sleep at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night, I would get to my computer at home and sometimes work till 1 in the morning. So there's a give and take too, right?
I think some lawyers that will hear it, they might be afraid that if they try to create the same system with their clients, the clients would not understand. But in your experience, did you actually find the opposite to be true, that the clients respected the way you wanted to protect your family time while building the firm?
Yeah, so I would tell you back then, I don't even know that my clients really knew much about it, because I didn't want necessarily that you ask to be known to them, to sometimes be that, oh, Alex isn't available, because these AirPods, they may have had wires on them, but they existed already.
Mhm.
So the reality was I was always on my phone. And so back then, the make up for it was is everybody had my cell phone. Now, not so many. Now, the only people that have my cell phone are the people that if I look and they're calling, I know I have to answer. Otherwise, there's a system to route those calls through the office. So I think the secret back then, which is again different now, the secret back then was, if you're going to be out of the office because you're going to be present in places that provide that work-life balance back then, you needed to be never very far away from this.
Right.
And that was the key factor. Phone calls could come in at 10 o'clock at night. They could come in at 6 in the morning. They come in the middle of the day. But it was something that was always important to me, is to be attentive. And some of my best clients today are people that will tell others that I landed their business because I always answered the phone.
And oftentimes in the conversation we have on the growth switch, there's a very clear difference between running the business of law and practice of law.
The
And
difference.
also, I think in growing a firm, it is a marathon, not a sprint. So you mentioned that you had to do things differently because of how you were respecting your family time. You had to hire people to help you, maybe sooner than some of your peers might have in a similar position. Do you think that became your advantage in the long term because you started with those systems?
So the risk that I took, which lawyers that watch this will turn around and some of them will, I'm sure, say that's crazy. I would never do that. Was the biggest roadblock. There's many, but one of the biggest roadblocks to growth for a small firm when you're a solo practitioner is that you have to release communications that are to your clients to be done by other people. And you ask any seasoned lawyer at a medium to large size firm, and for the most part, they will tell you they don't let anybody talk to their clients. And most of it is because it's about hoarding your business. It's about hoarding
Hmm.
your clients. Just yesterday, I had lunch with an attorney that runs a family office. And the attorney was telling me about why he hated big law and why he left. And one of them was because he was really good, but every time there was a client that invited him into a meeting on a big deal,
Hmm.
he was immediately taken off the project by whoever the partner was because they didn't want that individual getting so close to the client that the client started to value their services over theirs and then risk that person potentially leaving and taking some of that or all of that client work with them. So it's a very cutthroat reality that cuts
Mm.
against the advantages for a client. And to me, what I did early on was is I told my clients, it took me some time to learn, but to tell the clients, I am not going to be the one that is going to primarily handle your matter. You have to trust in my systems and the manner in which I hire and the manner in which I mentor and supervise. And it'll save you some money to have someone at a lower hourly rate than myself do the work for you at a high level with me involved. And obviously, you run the risk that if that person does a really good job and they leave, your client may leave with them.
Hmm.
But I'd like to think that they would value me, the system, the service, the honest conversation, the transparency more than that. And if they leave, then that's part of the risk that I'm taking. But otherwise, you can't grow because you can't be in 8 places at once.
Absolutely. And I think that's what law firms often realize much later in their history when the partner simply doesn't have time to be everywhere and they have to let go because of that. But you were quite intentional about that early on. One of the things we spoke before talking right now as well is how you structure the technology to make sure that if somebody does leave in the future, their knowledge is not gone with them. Do you mind sharing a little bit about how you create systems for that and how you think about it?
Yeah, so we're in the process, right? And I'll start with this. For anybody who's listening that's not involving artificial intelligence in any meaningful way, and they're a law firm, you're late, but you're nowhere near too late. And I think that because it's a journey, it's not an overnight decision. There are people who either fast fail or fast succeed. And sorry, fast fail or fast learn, right? And fast fail is what I am. And
Hmm.
fast fail is you may fail here, you keep going, you may fail here, but you're learning, you're processing, you're interacting with different opportunities and different things, and it's part of the process. And the fast learn people, which I will never be and I don't suggest, are the people who do nothing and then all of a sudden realize what worked for everybody. And then they try to learn whatever that was very quickly, but they're very
Hmm.
behind along
Right.
the way. So we are fast fail, which means your question and what you're asking is there's already available AI tools and processes and modified workflows that allow something that we are going to be exploring this year, which is the ability to take the institutional knowledge, data, and workloads done by senior level attorneys, for example, and you can do it with paralegals as well, but senior level attorneys and start to create almost like a institutional library for what that person does. So one of the biggest things that happens with law firms is when partners retire at some point. For
Hmm.
example, I have a wonderful senior partner Kay in my office, who I've known for over 25 years, and her immense amount of knowledge in what she does as a workers' compensation defense practitioner is second to none. One day she will retire, and that knowledge should not walk out the door with her. AI technologies now will allow you to take the information from that person and eventually be able to create agents within your firms that will serve as a almost replacement for that person's amazing amount of institutional knowledge to serve as an internal guardrail or mentor or work product analyzer for other lawyers and other people at
Hmm.
the firm once those people are either gone or they just want to work less or whatever the case may be. So that's one of the many, many, many available opportunities for law firms to explore, but it's one that we are actively exploring this year to set up using someone like myself, someone like her, other brilliant people at the firm to
Mhm.
institutionalize their knowledge within what we do.
For the firm that is inspired by that and they want to get started, how they should think about the first step to implement something similar in their practice?
Yeah, so everybody at this point, and if you're not, you're definitely behind, should be using either Claude or Grok or Perplexity or ChatGPT in some way, shape, or form in their personal life. And what I tell people when it moves it into professional life, even if you just spend a week on LinkedIn looking around, in week two, 85% of what your algorithm will now feed you will be AI all the time. And it's going to make you feel like you're behind, right? Because it's right, it's not true. It's just that's what your feed becomes. So you have to be very careful of how the internet treats you when you're curious. It could definitely make you think that when in the reality you're not. The other thing is as you get older, right, and some young people still have a problem with this too, which is in the age of entitlement, there are still knowledge and experience is king.
Hmm.
And you never want to be the smartest person in the room. There's still a lesson that will value through the end of time. And for anybody in my generation or older, we are never going to be the smartest lawyer in the room when it comes to legal technology, artificial intelligence, the integration of it, and what kind of products and tools or platforms or developing your own proprietary system is best. So we went out and hired a fractional CIO for our
Hmm.
office. We are not big enough, and we're not some $100,000 a day or 100 lawyer firm that maybe could afford a full-time CIO from inception. So we went out and found a wonderful individual who's been our CIO. He vets products for us, comes up and takes my
Hmm.
ridiculous ideas on a daily basis and vets them through. So my advice to someone is don't do it alone. You don't want to end up like I did a year ago on a Saturday trying to code my craziness on my computer for 4 hours on a Saturday before I realized, and I stopped and I said, was that the best 4 hour use of my Saturday? And the answer was no.
Mm.
So then right around that time, we hired a CIO.
You're obviously very passionate about it, and because of how your firm started, you're thinking a lot about it. Do you also encourage your colleagues to have their own experiments, even if they're not being maybe efficient by testing it on their weekend? Maybe they're bringing forward ideas that then get rolled out across the firm.
Yeah, so the biggest sticking point to the adoption of any technology, it doesn't have to be AI, it could just be any legal technology, a case management platform that you use. We are all going to have issues with training. Training is never going to be perfect. But if you bring in things to your law firm and the number one roadblock towards having it be operating at this highest level of efficiencies are blockades on adoption.
Hmm.
So if you have 50 people that are going to use whatever technology, Alex, it is that you bring into the firm, if you're not monitoring usage rates, if you're not monitoring who are your top users, if you're not checking in on the people that didn't use it at all, if you're not having some monthly or other cadence to a follow up to find out what people think about what they're doing, how are they doing it, and the other thing with AI and legal technology is whatever you learned 2 months ago, today it's already stale.
Right.
So because the technology is evolving is probably what makes some people sit on the sidelines and maybe wait until the evolution is slower, right, than it is right now. So what you learned 4 months ago doesn't become obsolete 4 months later. But I think the answer to your question is that you have to follow those things. And I'll give you one example if you're okay with it, which is about
Of course.
14 months ago, we instituted an artificial intelligence timekeeper.
Hmm.
That AI timekeeper was the first full-blown integration into the firm of any artificial intelligence tool at the office. And what we did was we tried it on 5 users, including myself, first for 2 weeks. I went 2 days and I was like, this is awesome. And
Hmm.
after the 2 weeks, we then figured everything out. And after a month, we went all in and gave the product to everyone. I looked at it every day. And after a week, there was one guy who wasn't using it at all. He had
Hmm.
2 entries that he used on day one and then never touched it again. So I called him.
Hmm.
I said, what's going on? Because this is kind of made for you. Your billing sucks and it's not very good. And I know you're leaving dollars on the table every month. Why'd you stop using it? He says, oh, well, because the first time I looked at the entry, it was incorrect. It didn't assign it to the right case. And then the second one, what it wrote, it would have required me too long to edit it. It isn't how I would have written it. So I stopped.
Mm.
If I don't know that and I don't follow up on that guy could have gone 6 months and never used the product and been entering time the old fashioned way. And I had to educate him and start putting my team to monitor him a little bit more. And within a month, he was using it almost 100% of the time to release all his time.
I think educating everybody and getting them on board is definitely quite important. But for somebody who listening, they might have reservations that, like you said, the technology changes very quickly. Something that was the best in class tool 4 months ago might not longer be the case. Do you have an example of something maybe that you tried implementing, it hasn't worked out, and what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, so I can answer both questions. One is, as I tell people, when I started the law firm, I only had to worry about the long-term viability of two companies, QuickBooks and Microsoft.
Hmm.
Nobody thought that either one of those companies was going away anytime soon, right? So it's okay to start your office with Microsoft 365, a bunch of Dell laptops, and QuickBooks Desktop because they were already large enough where you didn't really have a feel of failure. But to answer your question, everybody and their mother has a legal tech tool now. It was a 250 some odd $1 million industry about 10 years ago, and it's estimated to be a 30+ billion-dollar industry by 2030.
Mm,
So everyone has a tool. Everyone has a tool. Some 17-year-old in his parents' basement has a tool. So that was part of why I went and hired a CIO, was because I realized that I was not only needing to fall in love with the product, I needed to vet the people who were running it. Is this a side hustle? Is this their only hustle? How old are they? How much experience do they have? Where are they in their fundraising round? Are they pre-seed? Are they Series E? How many employees do they have? Where are their engineers located? Where's their hub located? How are they generating new clients? What kind of revenue do they have? So it was a business evaluation almost that needed to be done. So my CIO now does that for us whenever we vet someone. And I will tell you one example of something that we continue to use, but didn't necessarily work all the time, is private clients and institutional clients are very different. If you have an
mhm,
insurance carrier or a bank or a Fortune 500 company as a client of yours that has outside billing guidelines for what lawyers can do, you can't just slap on a tool and pass on the cost of it to your client most of the time. With a private client, as long as you disclose it on your engagement letter and they're okay with it, you can bill it till the cows
mhm,
come home.
right.
But that's the other part. So we had a tool which I love and we still use. And one day the company itself might become obsolete, so I won't name it. But it is a product that goes directly into the dockets on litigation matters. And as things get filed in there, whether it's the judge or one of the lawyers' offices, it immediately pulls it out of the system, brings it into your case management system, reads the document for you. And if it's a notice of a hearing or a case management conference issued by the court, it'll pull the dates and put it directly with artificial intelligence into the calendar of the correspective attorney and see if there's a conflict and create a notice. Like, it does all of that without a human. So that is something that always had some level of human error, right?
Mm,
Because the person has to wait and pull it and read their email, or it gets lost, or it goes into a spam box, or whatever it is. That reduces or eliminates the human error part of it. But there's a cost to that, and it fluctuates, but let's call it $30 a month per case.
right.
There was institutional clients that refused to pay the $30. So you're sitting there, right? And I can somewhat understand if they have 100 cases with your office. To them, that's $36,000 a year. So to them, like, we're not paying $36,000 a year for that. And to us, we think, like, well, why should we pay it, right? We're just
Mhm,
passing the cost on to you. So checking with clients in advance to ensure that they're willing to pay for something as little as $30 a month, which sounds crazy when they're spending $100,000 on the bill, but clients don't think that way all the time. They just see 100 files on average active at a firm. They want to charge me $30 a month. That's an extra $36,000 a year. I'm going to say no without
mm.
asking, why is it beneficial? Can it lower my costs in other places? What is it doing to expedite? How does the elimination of human error help me overall? Why can't they pay for it? These are conversations that have to be had with clients, even on a charge as little as $30.
I think that also brings an interesting question. You mentioned that it takes basically two companies from a technical perspective to start a law firm, Microsoft and QuickBooks. And knowing the numbers, I think as a marketer is super important, but it's still very common to talk to somebody who has their own practice and they are not on top of their numbers. And part of the area where we see that come up is that those hidden costs, whether it is adoption technology, not having the process that saves them time. If it's not obvious, it doesn't have necessarily in their mind a dollar sign attached to it, even though it absolutely has. Whoever ends up absorbing that, whether the firm, the clients, or somebody else. How do you think about the costs of implementing AI or the costs of marketing activities as the firm owner, and with the way how intentional you were about building this business for your lifestyle as well? How do you think about the numbers in your practice?
Yeah, so I'm going to start by saying it's never perfect, but definitely more than above average on what we chart and how we chart it. But there's so much room to get better. So I'll give you one example. My administrative staff had pushed back on switching us from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online for years. I've been telling them for the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a process, and they didn't want to do it, and the system wasn't broken. And we were already extrapolating information from our case management platform into an online law KPI program that was providing reports as I needed them, and I could log in whenever I wanted. So I felt like I was getting enough where I wouldn't trouble them. But eventually, we had no choice, and because I needed to get to the point, as you just said, of being able to monitor things, which we will by the end of second quarter of this year, be able to monitor even the most micro of calls, because even $400 a month is $5,000 at the end of the year. That is the holiday party. That's somebody's bonus. That's a lot of things. So, and I mentioned this the other day in our financial meeting for people to not to lose perspective. It was only as little as maybe 2 years ago that we'd be sitting in some of those meetings and somebody would be telling me about how we had a $35,000 outstanding receivable to some private client who had no money left in their trust account.
Mm-hmm.
That is a really easy way to prevent me from sleeping at night because you don't know if that client's going to pay. So we had to put in systems in place that were not really great at the time regarding budget notifications, threshold notifications, evergreen retainers for a client once they got it past a certain amount to make sure they replenished it all the way to its full amount so that that wouldn't happen. And just last week in our Financial Tuesday meeting, one of my administrators was telling me how upset they were about a client that happened to, and it was about
Mm-hmm.
$2,800, and she doesn't know if she can get it. And I had to stop the meeting, and I said exactly what I just told you right now. And I told them, hey guys, that sucks. We need to be better. But can I tell you about where we were 2 years ago? Can I tell you how big that number was 2 years ago? So perspective is important. While understanding some firms out there that'll listen to this will tell me that $2,800 is ridiculous, Alex. You should have it at zero. So we're always trying to get better.
Always better. Alex, for fellow firm owners, if they want to take the adoption more seriously, what would be your top recommendations for the maybe elements of the systems or certain tools that they should implement? Maybe a top three list, if you will.
So I think you have to start with a case management platform. So if somebody's not case management platform or somebody isn't cloud-based at this point, okay, there you are really late to the game. Let's go. Get off the folders on your G Drive or whatever it is where you keep things. And Clio, and sorry, Clio is one of the things I'm going to recommend. But COVID was what I was going to say. COVID kind of forced people to go to the cloud
Mm-hmm.
that maybe were not so willing to do so. And I think that hopefully they're seeing the benefits that they should after doing that and what that allows to do. Lawyers who are naturally conservative people by nature, I think that forced their hand a little bit. So my first recommendation is get on a cloud-based case management platform like Active, like Clio, Adorant, one of those. I'm extremely partial to Clio. Which is a $5 billion company at this point, and I've been with them for almost a decade at this point. So I was an early adopter in that sense. So that would be my first one. And the second one is your intake. Man, does our intake still need work? And that is a big deal for us. Automate your intake, follow your leads and conversions. So that's another one is that's where you lose money. Is you can do all the marketing in the world, but if somebody calls the office and they don't get signed up and speak to somebody within 24 hours, they're going somewhere else. So that would be so cloud-based a case management platform like a Clio, and make sure that you have a robust system, which we do not have one anywhere near where I feel we should have it at the standard, and we do have a good one, but we're still
Mm-hmm.
not at the standard that we need to be. And then the last one I will tell you, which is now the phase that I'm at. So I started this firm with one person other than me, and we're now 27 employees across 3 offices, and we are very strongly out to market right now for a chief operating officer that'll either be fractional or full-time, or fractional to full-time, or
Mm-hmm.
will be full-time. And that's our next step. Again, not to be the smartest person in the room, I suck at operations. That is not my gift. My gift is generating business and being a really great lawyer. So there's a lot of lawyers in my position that they get to a certain point and they're running operations and they don't know what they're doing. Admit that you don't know what you're doing, like I do, and go out and find someone. And that's, I think, the lawyers are not only conservative by nature, but they have an arrogance typically about them because you're paid to argue and be right. So, right, a brilliant lawyer told me once, and I know you have to go. A brilliant lawyer told me once that when you go to work every day, there's somebody on the other side whose entire job is to tell you that you're wrong every day. So don't let that affect how you manage your firm.
Certainly. Alex, that's been amazing advice. Thank you for coming on and thank you for sharing. And we'll make sure to include the links in the show notes as well, so our listeners know where to find you. Thanks again for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, my friend. Thanks for having me. I wish you much success. All the best.
Thank you.